working on their house.
No. But that, again, I had a friend, I know, who grew up, who grew up in Pittsburgh, which is right next to Madison. She gave me other ways of going. She gave me other ways of going.
Okay, good morning, one and all. Needless to say, I'm not Ted Strand. He had, I think, family business elsewhere. But on behalf of Ted and the group, we are thankful that you're here to hear some interesting conversations about a Gen Xer. What's a Gen Xer? What year do you have to be born to be a Gen Xer? I know about depression babies. Let us begin with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we gather this morning to have fellowship with some of our other members here at Westminster. We're appreciative of the opportunity to do so. Be with our world leaders to try to calm down the fears and wars that are dominating the conversations and the actions of the world. We look forward to the opportunity to share opportunities with one another and get to know one another. In Christ's name, amen. Before we start, I'd like to take 30 seconds and just say how blessed we are to have things set up for us. You know, I came in a little before 9 o'clock, and who was here but Dave Goodale taking care of things. What time you get here, Dave? Oh, well, 8:15 or something like that. How long are you going to be here, Dave? Oh, I'll get out of here by maybe 11:30 when I do the cleanup. So in addition to Dave, why we have Ann Zimmerman that takes care of the food. Dave also takes care of our name tags, makes our coffee. Obviously, Ted Strand does this particular assignment. And the other person that I don't think gets much recognition is Gary Boyd, who's kind of our treasurer. You see him kind of sneak out. He's cleaning up before we go. So on behalf of me and everybody else, thank you, Dave and Ann, Ted Strand, and Gary Boyd. Today's speaker is our Director of Youth and College Activities here at Westmoreland, Chris Clark, and he's going to talk about the importance of having trusted adults in the lives of younger generation, especially those Gen Xers. Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rob. So thank you all for having me this morning. It's a privilege. It's my second time getting to speak to this group, and had a wonderful time last time. And this is kind of an extension of what I talked about last year, or I guess it was even in the spring, when talking about the role of religion and spirituality in the lives of young people, and how it maybe looks a little different than what we assume about millennials and Gen Z. But just to begin, I wanted to kind of share, I know you all probably know me to a certain extent here as a staff member for the last 9 or so years. But my name is Chris Clark, and I work in the youth and college ministry here. I've worked before. I went to college at Eastern University, got my degree in youth ministry and a minor in biblical studies. Out of college, went to a small Presbyterian church called St. John's, which is over in Devon. If you know where the Devon Horse Show is, our church ran one of the best parking spots in the horse show. That was our big fundraiser. We raised about $15,000 to $20,000 every year just on that parking fundraiser alone. So I got really good at organizing cars and teaching youth how to organize cars. That was fun. I was there for about 4 years full time in the children and youth director position. And was actually an intern there before that, so it was a nice transition out of college. Married to my wife, Jess, who is a Spanish teacher. We have 2 kids, Hadley and Bodie. She's currently teaching at Lower Merion High School. So we met in college, and actually I say this all because we both interned at St. John's. In 2015, made the decision to look elsewhere and felt a call here to Westminster, to which Westminster also agreed. So I've been here since the summer of 2013 in August, working mostly in youth college ministry. having some input and opportunities to teach adult classes, to lead worship and preach and whatnot. One of the newest developments in my ministry and professional career is getting to start seminary this past fall. So I'm currently in my third semester studying at San Francisco Theological Seminary, which is a small Presbyterian seminary that's now part of the University of the Redlands, which is in Marin County out in California. So obviously I'm not in San Francisco, but I'm doing my schooling online, and which is a wonderful opportunity for me because we were not ready to uproot our family and wanted to be able to remain here. So it's been a real gift to be in the classroom again, to learn. I really enjoy theology, and I'm learning a lot that I just didn't realize I didn't know going through these classes. So yeah, my hope is to graduate within about 3.5 years. I won't speak to exactly what that next thing is for me. I know some people say, oh, MDiv, you're going to be a pastor. Yeah, maybe. But there's also lots of things you can do with MDivs. I know I would like teaching to be one of those things in some capacity. So yeah, still kind of feeling out the spirit on that one of where I'm being called after that. But I love youth ministry. I love working with young people. I love the creative spirit of young people. I think I love the way that they challenge us and our preconceived notions or our assumptions. They make us uncomfortable, quite honestly, sometimes. And I think they can remind us of our own younger selves too. I think sometimes we can actually see our own selves within the lives of, grandchildren or children, or neighbor kids or kids we see at church. So there's just a wonderful, sort of innovative spirit about youth and college ministry that just allows for creativity and listening to and for the spirit in the lives of young people. To which what I am going to be speaking on today is particularly the importance of not just, the working of God in young people's lives, but the particular role that adults have to play in that. Sometimes we can have this idea of like, okay, there's the professional. Chris is the professional who works with young people. He's been trained to do this. He knows how to talk with them. He knows all the social media. He knows all the lingo. Half of that is true. I think we sometimes make assumptions that we have to know everything that teenagers are up on. We have to know, all the social media. We have to know all the cool things to be able to talk with them. And I've just found that to not be true. In the 12 years I've been in ministry with young people, I've really found that to be kind of missing the mark. And what's really important is that there are adults in the lives of teenagers who truly care about them. I'm going to share 2 videos with you. They're really short. They're about 1.5 minutes each. But they're 2 videos by this research institute called the Springtide Research Institute, which focuses on religiosity and young people, particularly in America. And they're an ecumenical interfaith group. So they do research with Christian young people, but also Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, atheists, just to kind of get the full picture of the spiritual and religious lives of young people. So these 2 videos will give you kind of a primer on why it is so important for young people to have trusted adults in their lives.
Hi, I'm Josh Packard, Executive Director of Springtide Research Institute. The inner and outer lives of Gen Z are complex. The world they live in, it's complicated. And the way that young people form bonds, make meaning, and live out their values is constantly changing. This is, without a doubt, the most diverse generation that has ever existed. So our data show that, checking the box as affiliated or unaffiliated on a survey doesn't even begin to tell the whole story about young people's religious identities. It doesn't tell us what we need to know about the things that young people long for and where they belong to. More important than check boxes, behaviors. More revealing than affiliation, relationships. Our new report, The State of Religion in Young People 2020, will not just tell you, but show you how you can create relational authority in the lives of young people. To be an effective mentor in the life of a young person today, a new framework is needed, and we're here to help. Adults who care about young people, adults like you, often feel like they have just two options available when it comes to connecting with young folks and having influence in their life. Some lead with expertise and credentials. They have a title or letters after their name, or a position in an organization that allows them to be able to speak into the lives of young people. Others lead with relationships. They form deep personal bonds with young people so that they can be there with them through their toughest times. But the reality is that neither of these approaches is sufficient. Young people's lives are incredibly complex, and the world that they live in is very complicated. They need your expertise and guidance, but they won't listen to it unless they first know that you care about them and understand them. In order to have true influence in the life of a young person, you need to combine care and expertise into relational authority. The 5 dimensions of relational authority: listening, transparency, integrity, care, and expertise work together to provide a framework for connecting with others in a diverse and rapidly changing world. Now more than ever, young people need to know that the adults in their lives care about them, not just the institutions that they represent. Now more than ever, they need you.
So that's just to give you a little flavor of why it's important for young people to have trusted adults in their lives. And I will say, not just young adults. That's another kind of misconception, I think, about youth ministry or who is able to connect with adults. Some of my best volunteers have been retired or nearing retirement, sort of middle age or older. But there is this relational authority that is needed. So it's not just, oh, I'm good at being a friend to a teenager, or I have this expertise that I need to pass on to them. It's a mix of both, and it's this care and transparency and authenticity that really creates these bonds that are honestly protective factors for young people. I don't know if any of you know, but there is a survey that goes out every other year in Pennsylvania. It's called the PAYS survey, P-A-Y-S. And it is a survey that is, I forget the exact grades. I think it's 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th. So it follows the same, it's every other year, and it follows the same students essentially through their middle school and high school time. And it tracks things like risk factors of drug use, alcohol use, mental health, involvement in community, commitment to school, all kinds of things. It's very comprehensive. And we can see about every other year kind of these trends, countywide, statewide, but even school district wide. So there's one that's for the Westchester School District. Unionville has one, but it's very thorough and it's very helpful. And they talk about some of the protective factors. And one of them is being able to be recognized by adults in your community. Not just knowing, okay, there's an adult that lives 2 houses down from me, or I know there are adults in my church, or, I know I see adults in my community. It's being known by them and being recognized by them. So when they do that survey, there's a few questions they ask to kind of measure how well these protective factors, as opposed to the risk factors, are present. And so some of the statements they give students to say, I agree with or disagree with is, my neighbors notice when I'm doing a good job and they let me know. There are people in my neighborhood who are proud of me when I do something well. And there are people in my neighborhood who encourage me to do my best. So this is outside the family unit. This isn't mom and dad or brother and sister. These are people who are unrelated to me, but who notice who I am. And I don't know what you make of this particular number. You could, statistics, depending on how you see it, you can frame them in a positive or negative way. But 38% of students felt like these were true for them in Chester County. I think that's a low number. I couldn't find the trends. Sometimes the results are a little hard to find, but I couldn't find the trends if that is higher than usual, or if that's on a downward track, or if it's kind of fluctuated. But I think that's only a little over a third of students feel like they're recognized by adults outside of their family for who they are and their accomplishments. And that's the support that as you're growing, as you're developing into your identity, that you need a network of adults. So that's kind of a snapshot of where our county is. I don't know if I saw a couple of people nodding, a couple of people. What do you make of that number? Does that seem good? Does that seem bad? What are your initial reactions, Pilar?
When you say neighborhood, are you talking about like close proximity geographically to where they live? Or are you talking about, people in other groups they might interact with?
I think this probably means more like it could mean immediate neighborhood. I think it could maybe mean it's a little bit wider, but like the community that you live in. So like for everybody, it might be a little different. Like some kids might not go much farther than their neighborhood, but others maybe, okay, the full community, like the town that I live in, that I'm recognized. So maybe I'm recognized by my coach that really connects with me and really, encourages me and gives me positive feedback. But, my practice is 15 minutes away. I'm looking at this even specifically through the church of, how much can we say in the church as a whole, and how much can we say at Westminster that this is true? Where do we fall around the 38%, or do we fall higher? Do we fall lower? And that's an answer I actually don't know. But it makes me wonder, how well are we doing these things as a community, as kind of the neighborhood of Christ, or the community of Christ, as a faith community that's part of, hopefully, the community of young people in our midst.
Does this survey just cover teenagers in the public school system? Or are you including all these private schools we have around us? Do you have any idea?
That's a good question. It definitely includes public schools. I don't know if it includes private schools. My guess is it's mostly public, because I only say that because I know they give out specific public school reports. But I actually don't know. That's a very good question. Yeah. So that's kind of our more local kind of feedback we get on the state of how well are adults connecting with youth, or how well do youth feel like they are being connected with by adults. I'm going to hop over to it. Oh yeah, Dave.
So I just wanted to throw in that, when I was growing up, I didn't watch the tablet a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was out on the swing set or playing baseball next door or basketball, anything to get out of the house. Mm-hmm. Because there were only 3 channels on our TV. So I think it's a cofactor in this. Mm-hmm. Because kids don't necessarily play outdoors like they used to. The ability to connect with your neighborhood friends is, when our kids were growing up, they didn't have tablets. Mm-hmm. And they were out as much as they could outside, running around. Mm-hmm.
I think that's an excellent point, because we walk around our neighborhood every day. We have a practice of walking at least a mile. Mm-hmm. Particularly in the summer when the air conditioning's on, all these kids are in their house, mm-hmm. probably playing with their computers or their phones or whatever. Mm-hmm. So neighbors don't interact like they used to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there is some truth to that. Our technology allows us to be a little bit more insular. I think sometimes our neighborhoods, the way they're set up, are not always conducive to just going outside and playing. I mean, I live in a neighborhood, and I get a little worried about our kids riding their bikes because there's a lot of hills, there's a lot of curves, and cars come flying through our neighborhood. So we do let our kids out a lot, but it's hard for us to feel comfortable enough to say, yeah, go ride your bike down to Charlotte's house, because I'm not sure I feel safe of them doing that, because not because I don't trust them, but because I don't trust the cars going flying through. And I know even in the way kind of Chester County's set up, or Westchester, you know, you might have some neighborhoods that sit by themselves, but to leave that neighborhood, you've got to go on a back road or you know, a state road or a highway. So even the way our communities are set up sometimes are different than the small town that I grew up in, where I had a neighborhood, but then that funneled into just like the community main street. So if you go into Westchester, you might see more kids out like walking around or riding their bikes, but in the communities outside of the borough, the neighborhoods, you might not see that as often. Yeah, one more and then I'll keep going.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chris, Rise for Hunger, I noticed we had anywhere from 9-year-olds to 90-year-olds. And it's superficial, but you're integrated with these different ages, and you know, you're kind of working as a team with people of all ages. So some of these activities that the church has foster this kind of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me take us over real quick. If I can pull this up. So just some, this is again, Springtide Research Institute. Theirs is more nationwide, but it can give us a little snapshot into the lives of teenagers and young people even here. So they do a lot with, they've learned a lot on how teenagers and young people experience loneliness. I mean, we do have kind of a loneliness epidemic across the board in our country. But this is particularly how teenagers experience this. And what's interesting to me in this is that connecting with adults is a protective factor for youth. Being part of a religious community is also a protective factor. However, the research that they're finding is those two things aren't necessarily connected. So you could be part of an institution like a church or a faith community, but not be known by adults there. Like you come with your family, but maybe there's one adult who knows your name, but nobody really knows you. And so it's a little small, but up here, the light green is just the total sample of teens or youth that are interviewed. The darker green bars in there are those who attend religious gatherings, those who are part of faith communities. And you can see that participating in religious gatherings doesn't actually seem to offset that loneliness. That it's only like a small margin. Like you would hope that maybe being part of a religious community would really bring that down, but you know, I have nobody to talk to. 39% said that. 36% who are in faith communities said that. That's not a very big margin. Or I feel as if no one understands me. 45% total sample, but people who are part of a faith community, 43%. That's only 2% margin. So to me, that tells us we have some work to do. We gotta kind of figure this out a little bit better. So again, this is asking teenagers or youth. Gen Z is 13 to age 25. So it's not, I'd use teenagers as kind of a filler word. So they're asked to tell if they agree or disagree, or I think if they agree with each statement. So when they're asked, I completely feel alone. Those who said they really didn't have any trusted adults in their lives, 62% said, yeah, I agree, I feel alone, and I don't have adults in my lives. Those who had 5 or more trusted adults, only 9% said they feel completely alone. I feel as if no one understands me. I feel left out. I feel stressed and overwhelmed. There's a huge gap between those who don't have any adults they feel like know them, that understand them, and those who do have at least a small handful of trusted adults in their lives. This is where we see the disparity. And so what really that kind of tells us is it's not so much the youth getting into a church or being part of an institution or just coming to a space. What matters most to youth and young people is the actual adults in their life. So they can come here, but if they don't have that adult connection, then it's really not going to be much of a protective factor. So the relationships have to be the priority. And I think it has to be priority because not only should they happen here, hopefully they're extending into the wider community. Hopefully, you know, whether that's a grandchild, whether that's even getting to know your neighbors, or if you're volunteering somewhere and there are young people who also volunteer there, or it's a place for young people, that could be a protective factor of knowing you, of getting to know them. So I just really, I find it interesting that we need to kind of rethink, you know, it's not just getting youth to be part of an institution or part of a faith community. It's, does that faith community or does that institution have those adults who are willing to really put the work in? Because it is work. It could be hard. I know walking up to a teenager, it can be daunting. It can be daunting for me sometimes, especially if they've got a phone on them. But I guarantee you, they are not completely lost in that phone. They're waiting for someone to notice them. I know we kind of make an assumption that, oh, they don't want to be near anybody. They just want to be on their phone. Maybe that's true sometimes. I don't know. We all need space, right? But I've noticed that when I actually go and talk to youth and I just say, hey, what's up? They'll put the phone down. They might give one-word answers in the way teenagers give one-word answers. And they might speak in their own way, but it means a lot for them to actually be noticed and actually have a conversation with you. One of the other things I like to say is, it's not important to be interesting. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to be in the know. What's important is that you're interested. That you're interested in their life, that you get curious about what it is they love, what it is that makes them tick. In fact, you could have complete opposite interests. You could have like not really a whole lot of like hobby things in common. And I'm convinced, I think you can still connect with a young person because they just want you to notice and to be interested. And I want to show you a video of an example of this. There is an organization that was actually started at a Presbyterian church, and it's called the Columbia Future Forge. And their whole model is that they try to build these mentoring relationships for the sake of youth growing in a skill or having kind of like a particular vocation that they want to pursue. But instead of just going off and doing it on their own, they have an adult who walks with them. And they almost do kind of an apprenticeship. So it's kind of this apprenticeship of learning a skill or a job or vocation, but there's also this relationship, this adult mentoring relationship. And I want to show you a story of a young woman and a guy who middle-aged, maybe retired, two very different people, but how they found a way to connect. Sorry, missed the.
It's different than talking to a lot of other adults because often I feel like people are trying to sell me something and he's not trying to sell me anything.
So you're probably going to be in class before you can actually look for a job, kind of get settled in.
Brian will be the one that says, no, you can do better than this, and I know you can, so do better.
I think I've opened her eyes to why would that matter to me? I'm not an artist. A non-artist critically evaluating what she's up to and what she's doing.
It's a different set of leadership from adults that you're not going to get from your sports coaches and you may not get from your teachers, and it's a completely different environment in which to interact in the real world. So this is my print portfolio from my portfolio development class that I'm going to use to apply to the Savannah College of Art and Design. And I did it on the backs of old records because a lot of my illustration is record covers.
I try to take her artist thinking mind, the way she thinks, and put some practical boundaries. Well, how is that going to translate into you making enough money to be able to support yourself?
Without the Forge, I probably wouldn't have a job or wouldn't have the motivation to get one. And I think that working throughout high school and throughout college has been really good for me. Did you draw that? Yes. He's very much work-oriented in doing things, and I'm the exact opposite, where I just like to think and research and write about doing things and then never actually do them. And so it's good to have that constant push of, no, do it, do it, do it, do it, but in a good way, where it's not like, do it because if you don't, you'll fail, but do it because I know that you can.
And the more trust and the more communication and the more honesty, when you know somebody like that, you can really help them more in a more meaningful way, challenging their thinking to make sure they're on track where they really want to be.
As far as goals,
I'm just for time's sake, I'm gonna pause that. But yeah, I just notice these two very different people. This guy who's an engineer, he's goal oriented, get to the next step. She's very much artistic, very much dreamer, but they made this relationship work. Not really anything in common. And yet there was this bond, this capability of coming together and learning from one another and growing. So now I want to finish by sharing a way that we're really trying to start to do this at Westminster. And that's through our confirmation program. You may have heard that things have shifted a little bit with our confirmation. We have gone from a membership model to one of confirming teenagers for their gifts of the Spirit to serve the world and know that they are a beloved child of God. So the program we offer just is this. It's beginning in 8th grade. Westminster offers youth a 7-month-long confirmation experience framed by our Matthew 25 initiative, where they're confirmed for a journey of faith exploration and engagement alongside an adult mentor. So whereas confirmation has sometimes traditionally really been linked very heavily with membership, so much so that if a confirmand didn't join the church, so that at the end, I don't want to join the church as a member, I don't feel ready for that, then they also were not confirmed. They could go through the whole class, and yet they still weren't confirmed. That doesn't sit very well with me, and I saw it create a lot of anxiety, a lot of concern. And what I realized is there's this much more ancient, much more rich form of doing confirmation, where confirmation is not just a membership funnel into churches to keep institutions alive. Confirmation is about being confirmed for the journey that God is calling you toward. And membership can be a part of that, but it shouldn't be the end-all, be-all goal. And so it flips confirmation on its head, where youth are confirmed at the beginning. If you were in worship, we raised our hands, extended a blessing toward them as they were taking this journey alongside adult mentors. And so missional conversation doesn't prepare young people for institutional membership. It's not about joining the church, it's about joining the missional project that Jesus initiated and entrusted to the church. It inspires them to change the world in big and small ways in service of Christ. And as the author of this curriculum notes, he said, it can be a seed bed for developing a new generation of disciples who commit to following the way of Christ. It helps, it's a time to take healthy risks in reflective conversations with trusted adults. And so we're in our 2nd year of doing this, but this is the 1st year that we've done one-on-one mentors. And the way the program kind of runs is this. We're confirming their identities as God's image-bearing participants in the goodness and beauty of creation. We're confirming the Spirit's gifts of wisdom, understanding, counsel, and might, knowledge, wonder, and awe and joy in God's presence. And we're confirming their vocation as members of the priesthood of all believers, commissioned for missional engagement in the world. And you also might have noticed in the liturgy the last 2 years, we ask different questions of confirmands on Confirmation Sunday. We don't even ask the questions, we actually offer them a blessing. We say, you are God's beloved child. In you, God is well pleased. Reflect the light of Christ to a troubled world. So it's not, all right, do you affirm this question? Do you affirm this question? Do you affirm this question? Not that those questions are bad. I think there's the whole speaking and affirming that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, that I reject evil in the world, are beautiful and rich questions. But for what journey they're going on, these are really the affirmations you need to know that you're loved, to know that you belong, and to know that the Spirit is gifting you, and that this journey is for discovering how. And you need an adult to come alongside you to discover that. So as they walk through, they go through a particular curriculum. And this is now what it looks like. We have, this is a program called Padlet. I call it like a virtual bulletin board almost. And you'll see each month they go through a different faith value. So we begin with wisdom and discernment, and then move to justice and hospitality, compassion, unity and peace, humility, grace, and gratitude. And these are values that we want them to one, learn about and explore, but two, try and actually put into practice. It's not just how much you know about God. It's not just how much you know about the Bible. It's not just how much you can say about theology or the church. It's, what does this actually look like when I do it? What does it look like? Like, what are examples I see in the world of people actually doing this? So they'll see examples. They'll explore stories of people, Christians, practicing these values. And so they go through these with their mentor. They meet one-on-one. And then they actually upload a video of themselves. There's another app we use, reflecting on what it is they talked about, what it is they explored. And that goes to a certain platform where the other groups, the other pairs can go, oh, they talked about this. They were struggling with this question, or, oh, this group, this pair, they really had an interesting insight that made me think more. So we're creating this, not just one-on-one community between adults and youth. We're creating kind of this community as a whole to see what's going on in the lives of these young people. So that's how our program runs. And I mean, we're not that far into it. We're not even through October, and I have just been seeing a light turn on. I've been seeing a spark between these relationships. We had a retreat to kick off the year, and at that retreat, we're mentors, confirmands, and we would break them off and say, all right, go talk about these 3 questions, or go do this activity. And I don't think once when I did that, there was the awkward silence where you could hear a pin drop. There wasn't the, oh my gosh, we don't know each other, what do we say? There was kind of just this chatter, like, okay, let's get into it. And it was really beautiful to see these relationships forming, and it's beautiful to see these adults jumping in and these youth jumping in. And I think we just have a really beautiful picture of kind of what could be going forward of confirmation at Westminster. And we even had more adults who expressed interest in being a mentor than we could actually match with students. So I'm very pleased to know that even after this year, we have a pool of adults who said, hey, I'm interested, or hey, I'm interested, but not this year's not a good time, so maybe try me next year. But it's really, there's a lot of good energy behind it in this way that we can connect youth and adults more. And so here's my ultimate hope and dream for youth at Westminster, that young people would be deeply known and cared for by a growing number of trusted adults in our community. That young people who connect with our community, whether they walk in for the very first time or they've been here for their whole life with their family, they recognize that they belong, that they recognize they're a beloved child of God, and that they're gifted in the Spirit to change the world for the sake of peace, love, and justice. And we talk about this idea of changing the world with the youth at the very beginning. because one, we do feel that the Spirit is empowering them. We hold them to high expectations. We actually give them money at the end of the class to go and support an organization. They don't do what's traditionally been faith statements anymore. They write a proposal. We give them $150. They have to multiply that by 3 and then challenge other people to join them in that. And then we actually extend that to the congregation, as we did last year. And they step up to the challenge. If you hold young people to a higher standard, they will step up. And if we just say, hey, they're a teenager, they're too busy, I don't think they're not responsible enough, they'll sink to those standards. But I think youth are very much capable of more than we maybe sometimes assume of them. And so when we talk about changing the world, sometimes that feels like such a big thing. Like, oh, there's homelessness, there's poverty, there's racism, there's war, there's all these things. And sometimes that can feel really big. But we talk about changing the world doesn't mean you change everything. Changing the world means take a small step where you are with whom you are. So maybe that means you need to figure out how to extend more kindness in your school. We talk about a story where there was a group of youth at their school who realized that there were a growing number of kids who sat alone at lunch. And there was a senior he had been a Haitian immigrant, and his experience of coming to the US was very lonely, and he felt alone at school, especially at lunch. So he started a club called We Dine Together. And instead of going off and sitting with their friend groups at lunch and kind of holding off in those groups or cliques, he and a growing number of youth in his school decided that we're going to sacrifice our lunchtime to go and reach out to the kids who sit by themselves or don't have anybody, to let them know that they do have somebody. And it's grown. One of the kids they interview about this group is that he quit the football team. He let go of a scholarship because this was more important. Simply letting kids know that they mattered by sitting with them at lunch. So he emphasized changing the world doesn't mean you have to end poverty. It doesn't mean you have to end whatever the ism is in the world. It means that you start with where you are, and it could be something really simple but very profound. And this is where we're challenging adults to walk alongside them to help them recognize that they have those gifts. So I want to end. I want to leave enough time for conversation. I want to end with this wonderful quote from Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers is a wonderful man. I think very prophetic in the way he talked with young people and was present to young people, particularly children for him. He had this thing he did, I think, occasionally. I think he was, I think, accepting some award toward the end of his career. And he had the whole, it was this big, concert hall or auditorium. Hey, everybody kind of close their eyes. And he said, from the time you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, people who have talked you into talking, sung you into singing, loved you into loving. And so whenever I talk with adults about, hey, have you ever thought about working with young people? I draw them back to, who is it that did that for you? Who are the adults or the adult in your life that you remember? It could be a Sunday school teacher. It could be a science teacher. It could be a neighbor. It could be a coach. We all probably have someone if we think hard enough. But as we consider, am I that person? I think it's helpful to think back, who was that person for me? So I'll end there and just offer any reflections, any questions, any comments after I've given this all to you. Yeah, Dave.
Just checking the age group that you've been talking about, it's 13 and up?
Yeah, a lot of this research on loneliness and the ways that young people practice spirituality or religion or not, they're mostly, they call it Gen Z, but it's been researching and doing interviews with people who are age 13 to 25 has been the demographic.
To take off on what Dave Goodell said earlier, we all grew up, I think, in a different world. Let's say the 50s. On my street, 20 houses, there was one older couple without kids. Everybody else had kids. We all played together. The other thing I remember is hardly any women worked, so there was always the mothers around. So everybody, all the adults knew the kids knew the adults, and whatever. The other thing that was different is today we have this element of stranger danger. It didn't exist. Yeah, we were told you don't get into a car with some stranger. But I think today, I mean, especially for men, if you were to go down to the park and you saw a little girl crying or something, there's some element there that says, I can't get involved because the next thing I know, somebody's going to say I'm a pervert or something like that. And that really didn't exist, you know, to the extent it does today. And the other thing is the end of the nuclear family, where you have single parent households without a man or maybe a woman involved, whereas we didn't see much of that in the 50s. So how do all those things translate into what you're trying to do now and the difficulties you have to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, as Josh Packard, who is now the former director, there's a new director, said, you know, this is the most diverse generation to ever come about, and in a number of ways. And their lives are much more complicated because expectations for the family have changed. Sometimes just by cultural change and sometimes by necessity. I mean, it is hard to live in this area without a 2-income household. Unless one person's got a really well-paying job. So there's a necessity for that. I don't have any easy answers. You know, I think we do need to figure it out. I think the consequences of just saying, well, you know, things have changed and it's too hard to do anything. We need to figure something out. If we want a thriving life for the next generation. I think if we keep just kind of allowing that kind of loneliness to expand or say it's too complicated, we can't do anything, I think there's a difficulty to that too. I think it creates new problems. In some ways, it maybe just takes a little bit more intention, whereas maybe sometimes things have flowed better in the past where, oh, everybody's outside, you know, the kids are around so that, you know, I go out and I'm talking to my neighbor and it's, you know, it's kind of the natural interaction happens. We may have to be more intentional about that and saying, hey, let's do a neighborhood like block party. Like, what do you just kind of feeling people out and say, we just would love to get to know people. You know, our family's talking about doing that in our neighborhood. We know some neighbors, but we want to kind of extend, you know, the community and connection in our neighborhood. Just say, like, let's just get to know each other a little bit. So it might take just some more intention to do that. And I know that's not for I mean, if you're an introvert, I know that's really hard. just go out and say, like, hey guys, let's all get together. But finding ways to navigate the difficulty and navigate some of or bringing someone alongside you and saying, I'm not just going to do this on my own, but is there a group of people that maybe 2 or 3 others that we can do this together? That's kind of my thought.
Bill Tilson has a question.
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, hi. Not so much a question, more of a witness. Back in the 70s in the old church, I was senior high advisor working under Scott Sullender first and then Gary Scroggins, who were after. They're both assistant ministers. And it was an incredible experience working with the kids. It was the kind of a non-judgmental, trusting relationship with a group of maybe 25, 30 kids. In that group, we had people like Dave Young and Jenny Warren And they both became ministers. We had some great musicians. At least one doctor in drawing a blank, sorry, senior time. And it was such a rewarding experience. I still see some of the quote kids in church on Sundays and just out and about, and they've been lifelong friendships. So we talk a lot about what we're doing for the kids, and it's really important for them. But for us adults, there's a lot to be gained and a lot to learn by doing this kind of work. So I really applaud you for what you're doing and for the efforts at Westminster.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I think you raised an important point that there is, because young people are in a very important developmental phase. This is very important for like how you like the kind of person you grow into. But I think it is very, very formative for the adults who are part of that relationship too. I mean, the adults that I've had that worked with youth for a long time, like Rich Birkenmeyer, you all probably know that name. He's worked in children and youth ministry as a volunteer for a long time, like followed his kids and kept going even after they grew up and are getting married now. But Rich he'll always say it's as much an enriching experience for him as it is for the youth he interacts with, because he learns and he gets to build these friendships. So there is, there's this mutuality, I think, in these sort of Christ-centered friendships. And you also mentioned there's a word you used at the beginning as you were talking of non-judgment. And I think that's something that's very important, both for, I think for both youth and adults. I think for us adults, because we're maybe a little bit more grounded in kind of our emotions a little bit, to really come at this with a non-judgmental posture of one of curiosity. Not to say that we can't make judgments or statements and give our input and expertise and wisdom, but to really listen with a non-judgmental ear of being willing to learn and saying, okay, I have a lot of wisdom and experience that I can share and pass on, but I also don't know everything. I may have something to learn from this young person. So I appreciate you, Bill, using that word non-judgmental, and wonderful to hear that was kind of an integral part of that group of young people you worked with, several decades ago.
Yeah, they were and still are quite interesting people.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, Dave.
I just wanted to bring up, I think something that's changed in our lives is, well, I'm going to start with cremation. I don't think kids have seen, especially like small kids, have seen really death. I can't remember the last open casket that I've seen, except it was my wife's mother. And when our grandkids went out there and saw her, hundreds of questions. Well, where is she? She's gone? No, where? And even if you go back, our parents didn't have the experiences that grandparents had, where the great grandmother was laid out in the parlor, not in the living room, which was for the living, but in the parlor, laid out in the house, in the parlor. And we've gone from that, where death was present and discussed, and what happened to them. It just, I took them home Sunday night, and the kids were just asking me all the way home about God, about spirits. So do you have the same bodies? Can you fly? And, just 100 questions.
Yeah.
And my one daughter said, when I hear that song, I close my eyes. And what are you doing? She said, I'm thinking of God.
Mm. Mhm.
And that was like a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So I think the perception of death and the experience of death is really not there for a lot of us.
Hmm.
I haven't seen an open casket in years, except for Barb's mother.
Yeah, and that's something that has been slowly changing in our culture. I was actually when I taught the journey class on the miracles of Jesus, and I taught the story of Lazarus. And in doing some research, there's a historian who did, I won't be able to remember his name, but he did some work on our relationship to death, and he talked about how when Abraham Lincoln died, that was around the time when like morticians, that work of someone who's a professional dealing with the human body sort of really began to be a thing. So like when his casket was being driven around, you know, the body could go around for a while because you know you're making sure it's not decaying. But before, you know, it might be a family takes, you know, someone dies, a family takes care of it, and you're dealing with the body, and it's right there in the house. But once we move to this professional realm, that's where it really began to change, and it slowly changed where we get cremation, and you know, honestly, we live in a culture that really worships youthfulness, and I think in many ways is afraid of death and aging, despite the beauty and wisdom there is in that. So yeah, I think you're right. I think there for young generations and growing generations, there are overall definitely some distance with how we talk about death. Which again, Mr. Rogers was a wonderful. He was kind of pushing back against that a little bit because there was one episode where one of his goldfish died, and he just sat there and they watched it, and he looked at it, and he like gently took it out with the net and kind of flipped it over, and it was this moment where he's welcoming kids into this experience, like this is a part of life. It's not something we should be terrified of. I mean, part of our human nature is we are, but it's not something we should avoid. So yeah, there's something missing, I think, and our affluent, you know, very Western European culture, even in the United States, like we have this growing distance from death that even some other countries, non-Western countries, I think that wouldn't resonate. They probably have a closer relationship. Yeah.
My question was, you've had a pretty focused career. You haven't really been exposed to the for-profit world or the military or Peace Corps, that kind of stuff. How do you get the multiple experiences and historical context to really be able to look at things from, say, a broader view when you're working with the youth and so on that way? And you may not see that as an issue, but an outsider may say, you know, someone, and I'm not meaning just you personally, but someone in your role.
I'm trying to make sure I sort of understand. So coming from a non-ministry perspective, like their view on young people today, or
just having been in so many different environments and getting kind of a balance of what's going on in the outside world, kind of thing, as well as what your discussion is. And I mean, I know you can't do that in a sense because you're already where you are, but the mentors may help a little bit in that, but who knows?
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's the value of these mentoring relationships. Especially, I would love to see youth ministry, especially with older youth, maybe high school is probably more appropriate. Talk about vocation. We have a lot of career prep and college prep in high school, which is needed. We have college fairs and stuff. But I think the church could do more in having people in these fields. So in the corporate world, in the military, in nonprofit work, or like community service work, talk about what it is you're being called to, like what's the kind of work you're being called to, and what does your Christian faith look like when you're in these other spheres outside of the church? I think that's sometimes sometimes I feel this way, that it's an even more important question, because it's possible that a young person may never step foot in a church again. That's possible, that happens. But how are we preparing them for their faith to influence and have an impact on what they do in their professional life, wherever that may be? Not to say like, okay, my faith's over here and this was a church thing, and then this is my professional life, I'm a different person over here. I think that's where these relationships can be helpful, that there's adults can say, well, I work I have my own business. Here are the ethics I try to practice as a Christian in my business. I can pass that on to you, so that young people get a sense of, all right, it's not just about getting a job, not just about getting enough money, not just about being successful and however the world wants you to be successful, but what is the quality of that? Sure, you can go make lots of money, you can go get all kinds of stuff and get all kinds of recognition. If the quality of that was, it lacked a sense of responsibility, or a sense of love, or a sense of justice, or whatever, like any of those things that we talked about, wisdom and all that they're learning, that doesn't feel much like a very rich life. It doesn't seem like the good life that we talk about. One more question, and then we'll wrap up.
To tag tail off of David's point, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 22 years. At that point, I was stabbed in the back, I felt. And I felt all kinds of anger, frustration. I felt insufficient. I went to a person that had a note above her desk about God. And she was very kind. And she said to me, maybe this is He leading you. This isn't about the physical life. This is more about your spiritual life. It's time for a new challenge. So, and I think what David is saying is sometimes we need that faith within our physical life to keep things in perspective and not think, oh, I failed. It's me. No, it's probably he's got a bigger plan for you. You just don't know about it yet. And so that, I think that's a little bit of what David was saying. The experiences that kids, it's not all about you all the time. It's about God's plan for your future.
Yeah, build it in a way that kind of can build resilience of, if I fail, life's not over. I can
don't take it personally.
Yeah. Like I can get back on my feet, and hopefully I have a community of people that can help me do that.
Chris, thank you very much.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
Thank you.